Elvis was mid-sentence, cameras rolling, lights hot on his face. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a sharp sob. The king froze. A man in a worn army jacket was shaking, tears running down his face. Stories like this remind us why legends never fade. If you believe kindness leaves the deepest mark, stick with us. This moment only gets more powerful. The sound cut through the low murmur of reporters like a pin, dropping into silence. Flashbulbs had been popping seconds earlier. Not anymore. Heads turned toward the noise. Near the back of the ballroom, beyond the tangle of cables and tripod legs, a man sat hunched in his chair. Faded army cap, ribbons on his jacket, hands clenched around a folded paper program. His chest moved unevenly, like each breath hurt from the stage. Elvis spotted him immediately. His eyes narrowed, not in annoyance, but recognition. He'd seen this kind of stillness before, in hospitals, backstage, at USO shows. The king leaned into the mic, mid-answer about his latest single, then stopped cold. "Excuse me a second," he said, voice low but carrying. The Hilton's stage lights caught the gold in his hair, the crisp white of his jumpsuit as he stepped away from the microphones. The air seemed to thicken. Reporters shifted in their seats. Some glanced at their watches. A cameraman adjusted his lens but didn't dare speak. The scent of cigarette smoke hung heavy from the back tables, mingling with the faint tank of stage dust. Somewhere, an amp hummed quietly, left on between sound checks. Elvis walked down the few carpeted steps from the riser. His boots made barely a sound, but the creak of a chair under the man's weight carried in the hush when he reached him. Elvis bent slightly, putting a hand on the man's shoulder. The man's head rose slowly. His eyes were red. His lip trembled. Cameras clicked again, but slower now, fewer bursts, as if the photographers feared breaking whatever moment was unfolding. No one could hear what Elvis said first, but his tone was soft, almost conspiratorial, like he was speaking to an old friend. The man's fingers tightened on the program until the paper wrinkled. Elvis glanced down, then back up at him, expression unreadable. Without a word, Elvis motioned toward the front. The man shook his head, almost imperceptibly. Elvis leaned closer, murmured something else. This time the man hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. All eyes followed as Elvis offered his hand. The man took it. His grip was tentative but firm enough to pull himself up in that instant. The interview, the reason everyone had gathered, was gone, whatever was about to happen had nothing to do with questions or headlines. The two began walking toward the stage. Elvis kept pace with the man's slow steps, never looking away from him. And then, right before they reached the front, Elvis stopped, still holding his hand. Cut to black, the man's steps were unsteady, but Elvis didn't rush him. When they reached the edge of the small stage, Elvis helped him up the last step and guided him to a chair. The man sat heavily, cap brim casting a shadow over his eyes. His face was pale, almost grey under the ballroom lights. Up close, Elvis could see deep lines around his mouth, the kind carved by years of pain and holding back words. According to later accounts, his name was Frank Dalton, a Purple Heart recipient. He'd served in Europe during World War II. Family members would say he'd come here tonight to thank Elvis for the USO shows that had lifted the spirits of soldiers half a world away. But right now, Frank couldn't get a word out. His breath caught every time he tried. Elvis crouched down beside him, their eyes level. The white of Elvis's jumpsuit nearly brushed the polished floor. He placed a hand gently on Frank's shoulder. "It's all right, sir," Elvis said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. The sound system didn't pick it up. The crowd had to strain to hear, leaning forward in their chairs. Frank's cap brim quivered. A single tear slid down, dropping onto the folded paper program in his lap. Hilton program for that evening's concert. The paper rippled where it landed. Do you want to talk here? Elvis asked, glancing toward the microphones. Frank blinked twice, but no sound came. His throat worked, but whatever words were trapped there stayed locked inside. Behind them, journalists exchanged glances. Some scribbled notes furiously, sensing they were witnessing something rare. Others just stared, forgetting their questions. That's when a woman stepped forward from the side of the crowd. Mid-40s, hair swept back neatly, eyes full of worry. She bent toward Elvis and spoke just above a whisper. He hasn't spoken. In public since the war, she said. Since the injury. The words hung in the air, the kind that make a room feel even smaller. Elvis didn't flinch. He nodded once, then turned back to Frank. His expression shifted softer, but determined. Then let's do something else, he said. The crowd couldn't quite hear, but they could see the change. Frank's hand lifted, hesitated, then rested in Elvis's open palm. Elvis stood, keeping hold of him, and looked out toward the reporters. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't mind, I'd like to borrow your attention for something important. No one objected. The ballroom was silent, except for the faint buzz of the stage lights and the distant whir of a film camera. Elvis helped Frank to his feet. Slowly, deliberately, they turned toward the microphones at the front of the stage, and with the crowd's eyes locked on them, Elvis took a step forward, pulling Frank gently along. They were heading straight for the spotlight. Cut. To black. The creak of chairs followed them as they moved. Every step toward the microphones felt measured, like each one carried its own weight. Elvis stopped just short of the press riser, positioning Frank so the harsh overhead light didn't blind him. The stage smelled faintly of floor polish and warm electronics, the scent of every rehearsal and performance that had come before. Frank's eyes darted to the crowd, then down at the floor. His hand twitched inside Elvis's. Elvis leaned in. "This is your moment, sir," he said. Frank's lips parted. At first, nothing. The ballroom's silence seemed to grow heavier. The hum of the sound system, the faint rustle of a reporter shifting in his seat, all of it pressed in. Then, a sound low, fragile, he was humming. 3 notes, 4, the unmistakable opening of Love Me Tender. The crowd gasped. A few people instinctively applauded, then stopped themselves, afraid to break it. Elvis didn't join right away. He let Frank lead, his voice rough but steadying with each note. Then, softly, Elvis came in, matching Frank's pace, his tone low enough to let the veteran's voice be the center. Love me tender. For the first time all night, Frank lifted his head. His eyes, watery but focused, met Elvis's. A small, almost shy smile formed. In that instant, the years seemed to fall away. Flashbulbs began popping again, this time in rhythm with the music. Reporters scribbled without looking down, afraid to miss a glance, a gesture. Frank's voice held through the stanza, carrying the words as if they'd been waiting decades to come out. When they reached the final line, Elvis stepped slightly to the side, hand still on Frank's shoulder, letting him finish alone. The room erupted, applause crashing in waves, some people standing, others wiping their eyes. Elvis smiled at the crowd, then reached up to the silk scarf around his own. neck white, with gold trim catching the light. He draped it gently over Frank's shoulders. "You keep that," Elvis said, his voice warm but firm. Frank reached up, touching the scarf like it might disappear. His smile grew wider, his shoulders straighter. The photographers kept shooting. The reporters kept writing, but the air in the room had changed. This was no longer a press conference. It was something no one had come expecting to see. Elvis leaned closer, speaking just for Frank. "You're stronger than you think." Frank nodded once, gripping the scarf with one hand, Elvis's arm with the other. The applause finally began to fade, but no one moved for the exit. All eyes stayed locked on the two of them, waiting to see what came next. Elvis turned back toward the front row, guiding Frank to a seat beside him, but the microphones were still live, and Elvis wasn't finished yet. Cut to black, no one could. Remember the last question Elvis had been asked? Whatever it was, it had evaporated from the room. Frank sat beside him now, the silk scarf still draped over his shoulders, fingers absently rubbing the edge of the fabric. Elvis leaned in close, their knees almost touching, speaking in a voice meant only for the man next to him. "What unit were you in?" Elvis asked. Frank's eyes softened. His mouth moved slowly, like each word had to be coaxed out. "One? Oh, one," he said at last. "The 101st?" Elvis asked, his brow lifting. Frank nodded. Witnesses say Elvis's expression changed. In that moment, a mix of pride and something more personal. "I met some of your brothers overseas," he said quietly. "Good men." Frank's hand, weathered and scarred, gripped Elvis's more tightly. It stayed there, unmoving, as Elvis asked about his hometown, about the songs he liked before the war. From the side of the stage, a Hilton stagehand cleared his throat, clipboard in hand. They were running late. "Elvis," he called softly. The king didn't even turn. He waved him off with a small flick of the wrist. The stagehand retreated into the shadows. Across the room, journalists kept their cameras raised, their pens moving. They were supposed to be chasing quotes about a tour, but nobody wanted to break the spell. The ballroom felt warmer now. The hum of the overhead lights mixing with the faint whir of a reel-to-reel recorder still running at the back of the room. Somewhere, a glass clinked against a tabletop, and it sounded loud enough to echo. Frank's wife had moved closer, sitting on the other side of her husband, her hand resting lightly on his knee. She watched every word, her eyes glistening. Then, without warning, Elvis straightened in his chair. His right hand slipped into the inside pocket of his jacket. He glanced at Frank, then at his wife, and pulled out a folded slip of paper. The movement caught the attention of the front row. Several reporters leaned forward instinctively. Elvis didn't say what it was yet. He just held it loosely in his fingers, the way a man might hold something valuable but familiar. Frank looked down at it, puzzled. "This," Elvis said, "is for you." But before Frank could unfold it, Elvis stood, turning back toward the crowd. "Gentlemen," he said, "I think we've had enough questions for today." The cameras started flashing again. They knew something was about to happen. Elvis handed the paper to Frank and leaned down to whisper something in his ear. Cut to black. Frank unfolded the slip of paper slowly, his hands still trembling. The edges were worn, the creases sharp, like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times before. On it, in Elvis's unmistakable handwriting, was a phone number. Beneath it, 2 words, "Call me." Elvis crouched again, so they were face to face. "Any show," he said, his voice steady, "any city, you and your wife will be my guests." There was a beat of silence before the room reacted. Gasps, a murmur that rolled through the crowd like a small wave. Flashbulbs fired, bathing the moment in white bursts of light. Frank's wife pressed her hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, not from sadness, but something closer to disbelief. "You mean all of them?" she asked softly. "All of them," Elvis confirmed with a nod. "Best seats in the house." Frank blinked, his eyes darting to the phone number again as if making sure it wouldn't disappear. Elvis reached for the folded Hilton program Frank had been gripping since the moment they met. He flipped it over, pulled a pen from his pocket, and signed his name in bold, looping letters. "To Frank," he wrote, with respect. "EP then." He handed it back, pressing it gently into Frank's palm. Somewhere to the left of the stage, a reporter leaned toward another and whispered, "You getting this?" The other just nodded, pen scratching furiously across his notepad. Elvis stood, scanning the side of the room until he caught the eye of his road manager. He made a small circular motion with his hand, a silent order, according to one journalist seated near the front. Elvis's voice dropped as he spoke to the manager. "Put him right by the stage. Best seat in the house tonight." Frank's wife looked between them, her expression shifting from confusion to awe. Elvis reached down, helping Frank to his feet once more. "You up for a show tonight?" Frank's voice, though still quiet, carried enough to be heard. "Wouldn't miss it." The crowd broke into applause again, some reporters abandoning their notes to join in. The moment had shifted. It wasn't about celebrity anymore. It was about connection. As Elvis guided Frank and his wife toward the side exit, the flashbulbs followed, catching glimpses of the scarf still round Frank's shoulders, the signed program clutched tightly in one hand, and the folded slip of paper in the other. Just before they disappeared into the wings, Elvis turned back to the crowd. "Thank you, folks," he said simply, and was gone. 1 week later, far from Las Vegas, Frank's home doorbell rang. On the porch sat a plain cardboard box, no return address, no markings. Frank bent to pick it up, his wife watching from the doorway. It was heavier than it looked. Inside was something that would leave them, and everyone who heard about it. Speechless, cut to black dot, Frank set the box on the kitchen table. The cardboard was plain, the tape neatly folded over itself. No postage stamp, no label, just his name, written in block letters with a thick black marker. His wife brought over the scissors, and together they cut the tape. When the flaps opened, the smell of wood and varnish drifted out. Nestled in brown packing paper was a guitar case, black, with silver latches that gleamed under the kitchen light. Frank's hands hesitated before touching it. Slowly, he flipped the clasps and lifted the lid. Inside was a vintage Gibson guitar. Cherry sunburst finish, polished to a shine. The kind of instrument a man could fall in love with just by looking at it. There was something else inside, a folded piece of stationery resting on the strings. Frank picked it up, unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was the same as on that slip of paper in Las Vegas. "You'll always have a seat in the front row, Elvis." Frank didn't speak right away. His thumb brushed over the ink, like he was trying to feel the weight of the words. According to his daughter, he hadn't played in decades, not since before the war. But that night, he reached for the tuning pegs, twisting each one until the guitar hummed softly. He strummed a single chord. The sound filled the small kitchen, warm and full, like it had been waiting in the air all those years. His wife leaned against the counter, smiling through tears. "Play something," she whispered. Frank's fingers moved stiffly at first, searching for old shapes along the fretboard. Then came the melody, slow, sure, and finally, his voice. It was rougher than before, but steady. The same voice that had carried Love Me Tender through a Las Vegas ballroom, now carried it into the walls of his own home. His daughter, watching from the doorway, would later say, "It was the first time I'd heard Dad sing in years." The guitar stayed in the family after that. Every time Frank picked it up, someone would inevitably ask about it. And he would tell the story about the white jumpsuit, the press conference, the scarf, the song, and the gift that arrived without warning. That night in Las Vegas became more than just a memory. It became part of who Frank was. And for the people in that ballroom, it became proof that kindness, genuine, unplanned kindness, could silence a room in the best possible way. Elvis never mentioned it in interviews. There were no press releases, just a man who noticed another man hurting and decided to stop everything. And for Frank, that was enough to last a lifetime. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes small acts of kindness can last a lifetime. What's the most unexpected kindness you've ever seen?